In this special edition of The Russell Brown Show, I'm going to be combining Adobe Photoshop CS5 with its new companion applications called the Touch apps found on the iPad. And in this particular project, I'm going to use Eazel. I'm going to create textures and patterns in Eazel and then transmit them using this new technology from Adobe right into Photoshop, where I can bring all of them together within the project I'm working on. Okay, I just want to point out first that I'm using the current version of Photoshop, which is 12.0.4. With this version installed, you can then go up here to the Edit menu and you will see Remote Connections. You must set up your remote connection, of course, in order to link with your iPad. Once you've done that, then you can start to share your images right into Photoshop. If you'd like to learn more about setting up the connection to your iPad or to learn about some of the other Adobe Touch apps, then be sure and check out this website at photoshop.com that you see on your screen. Also, I'd like to point out that this photograph is of a great model by the name of Moses Sumney, and I took this image at a special Joel Grimes event in Los Angeles. Now you know. Okay, let's go over here to the iPad right here. As you can see here, I can click on my Eazel icon and open it up. Now, Eazel is a great way to create a watercolor-like effect, and it's really unique, and that's why I like to create my patterns and textures with the new Eazel painting tools and then bring them into Photoshop as textured layers. Okay, let's get started. Now, of course, Eazel can work with your fingers and your hands. Simply by clicking right on the surface of the iPad, you can bring up all your controls. However, I like to use a stylus. And to bring up the stylus tools, you merely click in the upper right-hand corner or the upper left-hand corner of your active screen. I really like the ability to use a stylus. I can go in, for example, and select my color. Targeting one of my color palettes here at the top, I can then go in and mix a particular color that I'm looking for. This looks good right there. Then clicking away, I can go to size. I can then click and hold and adjust the size by moving up or down, as you see here. In this particular project, I'm going to start with a really large brush. I like the effects of a really large brush with its opacity relatively low, as you can see here. I can bring the opacity all the way up or all the way down. I want to bring my opacity right about here. What's really nice is that this semi-transparent opacity will transfer directly over to my Photoshop project that you'll see in just a minute. Next, we can start to paint. I'm going to click away once, and now the surface is active. Watch how I can go in and start to paint on the surface. As I dab around, it acts as if it were watercolor, and I can add to the sections by just clicking and dabbing the color in, and it runs into the other colors that are already there because it has a wet-like quality to it. This is a great start. I'm now going to go back to my controls and change my color to a red value. Click away, adjust my size down a bit like this. Now the colors I laid in first are still slightly wet, so if I go back in, notice how these colors bleed into the surrounding background. And while it's still wet, I can then go through and add this second texture like this. I'm just going to go through and dab over my surface. I'm creating a crazy and wild texture. Something that's going to be blended into the background of my image that I showed you earlier. I'm going to go in with one more color, clicking in the right-hand corner here. Let's go in with black, a semi-transparent black, clicking away, and now I'm going to add a little bit of black to the borders here. Notice again, the colors are still slightly wet, and they're blending in around the edge like that. Cool. Now I'm ready to use this pattern that I've created here in Eazel, but over in Photoshop. So let's bring up our controls again. In the upper right hand corner, I click and then I'm going to go right down here to Settings, because here it is, the ability to transmit right to Photoshop. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I'm connected to Photoshop. If I click on this icon, you can see that yes indeed, that I'm connected. I can click away from that, and now I can click on Transmit to Photoshop. The screen will slightly flash, and then if I quickly switch over here to Photoshop, check it out. Here I am inside of Photoshop, and I've transferred that exact pattern right over. If I select my Move tool now, I can then click on this pattern and drag it right over to my project and drop it in just like this. Notice the semi-transparent quality to it that I achieved by selecting the semi-transparent brushes. But there are some really nice watercolor-like effects that I can only achieve here on the iPad, which is really cool. Now I'm going to transform this with Command-T on the Macintosh or Control-T on the PC. And let's transform this down. I'm going to give myself a little bit more work area here so I can see my control points. I'm going to hold down my Shift key to constrain this, then move it into position, rotate it by moving my cursor away from my box, and hold down the Shift key to constrain that just like that. And then once again, without the Shift key, I can then go in and distort this so it meets the shape of my existing image. I hit the Enter key, and it resolves that into position. Now, let's go in with our blend modes, because that's where the real magic comes into play here. If I select a blend mode, for example, of overlay, I can start to blend this down into the image. Let's bring this up in size just like this. This is really cool. Some really nice watercolor-like effects blending into my background. Let me show you some other layers that I created in this same process. Let me turn off this background. Then you can see here that it created a second image, an image of just black to reinforce and darken the edges. And down here, I've created some streaks and patterns by using a really small brush and then sketching over the surface to create this pattern. I set the blend mode for this for overlay. I set the blend mode for this layer to multiply. I place them on top of my image, and then let's now add in this final layer that I just created, just like this. I can change the order of these, of course, to get different effects, but I can also go in and remove portions of them. In this case, I want to remove some of the color here on the model's face. Targeting that layer, I can create a layer mask. In this case, I can select a brush tool. I can make sure that my brush is nice and soft. And my opacity is at about 20%, and I'm painting with black on a mask. I can then go in and start to paint here and remove a portion of the pattern that I just created. Let's blend this out because it was adding a little bit too much color. Cool. There you have it, a really interesting way to use the new Eazel application found here on the iPad to create textures and patterns that you can then transfer right over to Photoshop and combine with your existing projects. Fantastic. Give it a try.